On episode 704 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Dr. Kyra Bobinet and discuss her book, Unstoppable, the new neuroscience that frees us from failure, eases our stress, and creates lasting change. Welcome to the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, the largest and longest running health and fitness podcast dedicated to people over 40. Whether you're looking to lose weight, get stronger, or improve your health and age better, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Coach Allan, an online health and fitness coach and author of the Wellness Roadmap. Each week, we dive into practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and fitness. If you're ready to look, feel, and perform your best, no matter your age, this podcast is the perfect place to start. Let's get you on the path to a healthier, fitter, and more energetic version of yourself. I hope you'll join us each week, and together we can unlock your full potential. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. I'm really glad you're here today. We're going to have an awesome interview with Dr. Bobinet. But before we get there, I just want to kind of share a couple things. Obviously, if you've been following me on Facebook or anywhere, really, you probably know that I am now a grandfather, first-time grandfather. It's pretty exciting. I was spending some time with my father's side of the family here in Asheville, and now I'm going to be heading down to Mississippi, so I'll get to see my daughter and my new grandson cruise. So it's going to be some busy times. But this is the kind of travel I actually like. This is the good travel, whereas I've been doing a lot of travel that I didn't really want to do, didn't really like. So this is good. I'm glad to be doing this. Hope you're doing well, and let's go ahead and jump into the episode. Our guest today has passionately pursued and studied the truth about behavior change for nearly 3 decades as a physician, public health leader, healthcare executive, and behavioral expert. An award-winning health innovator and thought leader, she has an MD from UCSF School of Medicine and an MPH from Harvard University. She belongs to the Stanford Medical School AIM Lab, where she has taught on health behavior change and is CEO and founder of Fresh Try, a behavioral software company based on the latest neuroscience of habit formation and lasting change. Her best-selling book, Well-Designed Life, is a collection of globally influenced brain science and behavior change. With no further ado, here's Dr. Kyra Bobinet. Dr. Bobinet, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thanks for having me.
So I have to admit, I love reading books about neuroscience. It's one of the most fascinating things to sit back and actually just start reading about how complex our brain is. And it seems like every time there's a new book out, it just even got more complex. I learned something new. That's what I like about that. I learn something new every time I read one of these books about neuroscience. And then the cool thing is particularly with this book, and one of the things I loved about it was that this was not just okay, this is how your brain works. These are the bits and pieces. This is what we know. You took it all the way to this is what it means in your daily life.
Yeah.
And then gave us some tools to work with our brains instead of against them.
Yeah.
And so the book we're going to talk about is called Unstoppable Brain, the new neuroscience that frees us from failure, eases our stress, and creates lasting change. Big, big, big promises. And then you deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So in the book, and this is kind of an interesting topic because I see it a lot. And I don't just see it in my training, I just see it in everyday life. There are people who just feel like the world hates them and is conspiring to beat them down. My phrase I used to use was happy miserable.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Well, only because, and I have some family members that kind of have this, is that they just believe that things will turn out bad no matter what they do. And so the term you used in the book, and when you first used it, I'm like, yeah, that's a better term. And then you said, well, it's motivation loss. I'm like, okay, yeah, of course, that's what it is. But so the term was learned helplessness.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you further go and say, okay, when we actually understand the root of the problem, that's not what this really is. This is just
Hmm.
a loss of motivation.
Right. Exactly.
Can-
And learned helplessness was like a observation or a psychological view, on animal behavior. When you put an animal into a defeated position in an experiment where they can't get out, they can't do anything to help themselves, then they said, oh, that's a learned helplessness, because then they would stop advocating for themselves. They would stop trying to escape. And, I think that's a really unfortunate word when it comes to humans, because now that we know about this area of our brain, which everybody needs to know about, I think this is the most significant brain science in my lifetime. So we're lucky to be alive at a time when this is coming out so fulminantly and allowing us, giving us the opportunity to apply it to our everyday lives, as you led with. And the first principle is motivation loss. We lost our motivation. It's not that we are unmotivated, it's that we lost our motivation. Just like you can lose your breath or you can
Yeah,
lose your lunch.
or both.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I was reading through it, it was kind of that, that I had read this sometime, and I don't know why this particular one stuck with me so much because I don't have elephants in my life every day. But the principle was that they stake the elephant when it's young to a rope and to the stake, and the elephant fights against the stake until they realize that they're never going to be able to get their foot pulled away from this stake. And as the
Yeah.
elephant gets bigger and more powerful, it doesn't even know how much stronger it is now,
Right.
and they literally could just tie it to anything practically, and the elephant, seeing that they're in this situation, just stays there because they don't know that they could do something different.
That's right. It's
And
it's
that's
the
just,
disempowerment switch, isn't it? It's
yeah.
the way in which we can play small. It's a way in which we can play less than what our capabilities are, what our potential is.
And then when I equate that to some folks that I've talked to, and this is the hurtful thing about it is when I'm hearing people talk like this and using this language when they're talking about themselves, and particularly in the
Mm-hmm.
range of weight loss,
Mm-hmm.
particularly for women over 50 and menopause, they've tried. It's like I've tried everything, so it's me that's broken and not everything.
Yeah.
And they don't believe they can lose weight anymore, and they
Right.
believe that they've got kind of this destination, that they're predestined to be something that they're not, because they haven't found the right thing, or they haven't gone long enough with one thing to make it work. They're trapped. They feel trapped and frustrated and angry, and it's very, very hard for them to get their motivation back when they're at that stage.
Yeah, and they don't know that they have a motivation kill switch in their brain.
Yeah.
Like, so of course of course people think, oh, it's me, because they don't, when this part of the brain goes off, and it's called the habenula, we're talking about, nobody knows about it. It doesn't have a PR firm going out there, saying, hey, this is everything. But in truth, this is the master control switch of what we do and don't do and our mood. What else is there to the human experience? That's the bulk of our experience, is what we do or don't do and how we feel. And so a woman in her, menopausal years, which I am, facing increased sugar cravings, which I do, and lower energy or more need for sleep, which I have, like the key to all of that is to not believe the failure stories, not believe the failure thoughts, because that's the thing that turns on this part of the brain, and you want to keep it off. And it also, when this part of the brain is on, it drives itself, drives emotional eating, stress eating, poor sleep. So I think the new skill in all of wellness, in all of losing weight, in all of working out, has to do with managing the habenula. That's what I've come to. That's
Yeah.
where all the science is pointing.
Well, yeah, and when you in the book you did a great job of you tied it into other things that we experience as humans that when it's like after you say it, it's like, well, duh, of course, that's why that works that way, because you're thinking about, we're wired for dopamine and we want these things, and then they start talking about things like addiction and that that it's driven by dopamine, and you're like, okay, but we didn't just keep doing it because it was the dopamine. We keep doing it for another reason, and it's this habenula that has basically turned itself off in this case for this particular thing, and that makes
Well, yeah,
making it
or it
somewhat.
gets what happens is, so since the book came out, a couple of additional puzzle pieces have hit the table. So one is that the habenula is responsible for the agitation, restlessness, and bad feelings of withdrawal symptoms. Whether that's withdrawal from your digital addiction, whether it's from some sort of chemical substance, some sort of other behavior that you take in. When we feel bad because we're not using, that's the habenula going on, saying, this isn't working out for you. This is not, we're not normal here. And most people who are addicts in a very severe way, like to heroin or something like that, they say, I don't get high to get high. I get high to feel normal. And so that normality is what we're seeking with the dopamine, whereas the habenula is punishing us anytime we are not in that chase for dopamine. It's punishing us with failure, with depression, with anxiety, with this, terrible withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah, the reason that made sense to me is I went into it, I was thinking, well, it makes sense because you can't just say I'm a heroin addict, but I know I can get a dopamine hit from sugar, so I could just swap those addictions and I would be fine, right? But it doesn't quite work that way because your brain isn't, the motivation kill switch is not set up for sugar at that point. It's set up
Yeah.
for the heroin, and that's why that's going to be what is like. This isn't normal. You shouldn't be this way. You need to go back. You need to do this, and it's driving that behavior. It also has a pretty heavy tie-in with depression and anxiety, which
It
also made
does.
sense when particularly, I mean, I was thinking about it, when you started talking about it, I was thinking, well, from a performance perspective, obviously if just getting better and better and better and better is the goal, eventually you're not going to get there. And if that's
There will come a
something that
day.
that will depress you or cause you anxiety because your
Yeah.
performance isn't better today than it was yesterday,
Right.
it's just as good, but it's not better. Then yes, that would be quite defeating to say, okay, I can't just keep getting better when that's exactly what I'm driven to want to do.
Right. And therein lies why CrossFit hasn't taken over every single person in the nation, right? Because there's a real focus on stronger than yesterday, better than yesterday. Like, and any performative tool, while it is good, while it works, while you're healthy and uninjured, while you're young, while you're able to beat your time yesterday, while you're still optimizing, it produces a reward pathway cycle. But the second that's not true, you could have the sniffles that morning, you could have had the wrong breakfast, you could have had whatever. The second it is not true that you are better and stronger than yesterday, that is a failure signal. We don't feel it. How it shows up is you stop going to CrossFit. And
Yeah.
that's where I think people are just really surprised that they're being blindsided by this mechanism, and because they don't know it exists.
Yeah, you talked about performance and a little bit about, and then you got into triggers. And this was a very interesting part of the book for me because these are tools I've used, and they're for
Me too.
myself and for others. And I'm
Me
like,
too.
okay. and their tools, the leaderboard one is the one that I've never really liked. And I
Why?
remember I went to CrossFit. And so I'd go to CrossFit, and what they wanted you to do was they wanted you to write down your times, or how many reps you did with an AMRAP, or what weight you used on an EMOM. And I was like, there were times when, yes, I would have been high up on the leaderboard had I put my stuff in there. Um, and so I can't say there wasn't a draw to want to be seen on the leaderboard. I mean, it's part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We all want status, and this is a clear representation of status if I'm the
In that community.
strongest
Yeah.
in the community, especially given at the time I was 51 years old. Um, but there were also many times when I would have been at the lower end of that leaderboard for just different things. And I didn't want my name there. So I just made the decision, the conscious decision, I would never write my name on that board, regardless of whether I was proud of the outcome or not proud of the outcome, because I realized it wasn't going to drive a positive behavior really either way. It was just an ego driven thing for me if I was going to put my name there because I knew it would be high up on the board. Um, and so it was just one of those things that I could understand the leaderboard being a trigger for a lot of folks because, you're on the leaderboard, you're on the leader. Oh, you're not on the leaderboard. That could be kind of a problem, and it could be an injury. It could be just that you just had a bad day. But what you got me on was the SMART goals. I'm like, okay, let's dive into that one because this. I mean, I was also in corporate, so this was drilled into us. You set your goals, and they need to be SMART goals so we can, we know what they are, we can measure them. They're relevant to what we're doing, and they're attainable but stretch, and they're time bound. So we know before the end of this quarter, you're going to have done these things, with the premise that if you do these things and everybody else does their things, then the company moves forward. All of us are rowing in the same direction.
Yeah.
But you looked at them from a slightly different perspective of how that can become really demotivating.
Yeah, so they're like a knife. It's about knife skills. Your knife can, do a really great job chopping vegetables, or it can cut your thumb off. It's like how you manage these kinds of tools. So SMART goals was never a health thing. Goals itself didn't come into the zeitgeist, into the vernacular of English until after World War II. And it was about, health goals for the nation, like public health wise. And then evolved that forward, 20 years. And in the 60s or maybe the 70s, there was a gentleman in Idaho who was a management consultant who came up with the idea of SMART goals for teams at a business. And the reason why that works is that you're in your power lane supposedly of a career choice, and you're perfecting your skills. It's an appropriate time to really push your skills and to be accountable for your skills and things like that. Where it really, and it does backfire even at that. That I was in a very large healthcare company for like 4 years as an executive, and it was kind of this, it lent itself to cheating and lying. So people, in order to, achieve their goals of looking like they were moving projects forward, would just join these teams of like 14, 30 people, on these calls to look busy because they're really, in truth, weren't doing anything towards that end. And then they got to put it on their little scorecard at the end of the year. And so, the manager, who really didn't know exactly everything that they were doing, they couldn't know everything they were doing, was like, okay, so I think there's, a lot of evidence that performance-based goal orientation, which is what it's called in the literature, is highly, highly correlated with this cheating, this lying. I cite Lance Armstrong. There's anybody who's ever cheated or lied is probably doing it to be safe from judgment and consequence, and is doing it in response to a performance or an expectation as a performer of some sort. And so that's the sharp edge. That's the sharp point. So we can play with these things in areas of our expertise areas where there's kind of like a one and done. There is a finish line. It's not like weight, weight management, which is like for the rest of my life, I mean, or being fit, which is for the rest of my life, right? Like we don't have to keep adapting and iterating on that. So if it's one and done, like graduating high school, once you graduate, nobody can take that away from you, that's a performance. So there's certain things that performance-based goals are good at, a short-term thing like a football game, let's win that game, or let's play a soccer game, let's win that game. Those things are appropriate uses for performance-based goals. But again, even professional athletes have depression. Why did Michael Phelps have depression? Why did Simone Biles have depression? Why are our top performers in the world, whether it's in music, whether it's in academia, whether it's in sports, whatever it is, why are they all having anxiety problems and depression problems and suicidality and all these things? It's because of this unmitigated push to turn everything into a SMART goal and to perform.
Yeah, and I think again, when you kind of get to that level, we're not talking about fundamental change and improvement. These are minuscule changes that are the differential between first place and winning a gold and 10th place and watching them on the podium. And so it's such a small gap of difference, and the level of effort it takes to earn that differential, if you're even capable, because not every human body is going to respond to every action the same way. It's not predictive of, okay, if you do this, then that, because in many cases they're in an area that's so rare that no one's ever done it before. I mean, if you're running a world record pace, guess what? No one's ever run that pace before if you're successful in doing it. So no one really knows how to train to run any faster than the last guy did it. So I could just see the pressure of trying to perform at that level and not still doing extremely well. I mean, you brought home 8 silver medals, and you could still be upset that it wasn't 8 gold medals. So yeah, just interesting. Now, one of the things you said in the goals that I struggle a little bit with even now is that, okay, so if I set a goal for my health and fitness and I say, okay, I want to walk more. And so I say, okay, I'm going to walk. And initially I know, okay, I look at the guidelines and it says you got to do 10,000 a day. And I'm like, okay, I don't know where that came from, but okay, that's 5 miles. I don't have time to walk 5 miles every single day of my life. Okay. Some days I can probably do 11 or 12. Other days I may only do 7 or 8. That's what I can do. So if I say, okay, I'm going to try to, so I set the goal a little bit easier or something. I say, okay, what I'm going to do over the course of 7 days to a week, I'm going to walk 49,000 steps. So basically 7,000 a day is sort of the kind of middle point I got to average to get my 49. Now I can ask myself, is that goal super hard for me, or do I feel like that's truly attainable? And then I can say, okay, I don't feel like that's so difficult, but it's still, that's 7,000 steps a day, working out to about 3 miles a day. So it's still a little bit more than you just normally would be walking to go to work or do your things. So I may say, okay, at first let's drop it down and let's make it 5 a day. So we'll say, okay, 35,000. Is there a problem with kind of sitting down and really confidence checking your goals at first and then stepping them up a little?
Yeah, I mean, making things smaller, it lowers the probability of failure in the mind. But you still haven't dealt with the root cause, which is that the brain you're talking to, whether it's yourself or a client or a patient, they are going to find ways to fail on whatever. You could say, take 2 steps, and they'll figure out a way to fail on that. Like I've known people who, like they can't do the one push-up. They try to do somebody else's recipe. Like, I'm going to do 1 push-up a day. And then they injure their shoulder and doing something else, lifting their kid or whatever, and then they can't do the 1 push-up. That's a failure signal. So I think it's the looseness of not protecting ourselves from this part of our brain that you could set whatever goal you want, but if you hold it in a way that is rigid, that leads to some sort of failure thinking, then you're toast. You're going to kill your motivation. You're going to blame yourself. You're going to feel bad. So I'm trying to rescue people from that side effect from how we're thinking about now, to incorporate how their brain works and do it differently. So how I would do it is, well, for one person who's more quantitative, but also hesitant worried about the 10,000 fitting into their schedule, I think what you just outlined is a brilliant iteration, and we can talk about iteration here in a minute. But that's a brilliant iteration, an adjustment, an adaptation, a tweak to the original, benchmark, so that it fits their life. Because if it's more doable, it's more likely to be done, right? Yeah. The other way that might help for people is to just like bottom up. Like, let's see how many you can do. Let's see if you can push it a little more. Okay, you rebelled against that. Let's let go of that. It adds other movement into your day, but you can park farther away. You can do extra things around your house, like all those kinds of things. Counting. I'm on this path myself right now. My father died in 2020, and he was such a judgmental, performative, like you've got to work out, because he ate like crap, and he compensated for it by working out constantly, whether it's chopping wood or doing stuff outside. He grew up on a farm, so he's all about physical labor. And me and my siblings are like, we kind of rebelled against that because it was so oppressive, and we always felt like we weren't good enough as working out enough, and that kind of got into my head. So I've been on a detox the last several years and just started getting back into exercise in the way that I was like looking forward to it. It was interesting. Yeah, I was searching for it. And what I'm going to do after we get off this podcast is I'm going to go out in the forest, and I'm going to walk, about 6,500 steps, because I've seen that 2 laps of that, do that. And then that makes me feel good. And then I'm like, okay, I'll work in the rest later or during the day or things like that. But I think people just jump to these guidelines too quickly, and too often those guidelines are one size fits all. And all that matters at the end of the day is what you can get yourself to do, full stop. That's the only thing that matters. And that'll encourage more curiosity, more interest, more leveling up, more interest of stretching and pushing, and like that's the only way that I've seen as a safe, longitudinal, lasting, sustainable way to do any of this.
Okay. Now, in the book, you had the rules of failure disease.
Yeah.
And I thought these were really good, because this is in a sense how you in my thought process is, this is how you can look at failure differently. But you have to do these. You have to know these rules first, because if you don't pay attention to this, then that's when it's going to get you. So can you go through the rules of failure disease?
Well, we should know that our brain works a couple different ways. We have failure diseases that come from thoughts that are like patterned thoughts. Our brain is a bunch of patterns that helps us to not have to reinvent the wheel every time we want to take a sip of water, and remember what a cup is and learn how to turn on the faucet. Like, those are automatic things that our brain does. And similarly, the way that we think, the way that we feel about ourselves is a disease sometimes, because there's something called negativity bias that the brain is always trying to keep us alive. And so it's always going to have 2 times the amount of response to loss and failure and I'm a failure than it is I'm a success, that was good, I'm enough, like that kind of stuff. And so what I've done in my research over the years of patient care, of research on large populations of people around health and wellness, and my own personal like behavior change practice with people, helping people do this, and my company, is look at all of the clustering of how failure types set up in the brain as failure diseases. So, one of those that's most common and familiar to people is black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking. Well, I took a bite of something bad, so now, to hell with it whole day, right?
Yeah. Or a whole weekend or a whole week or a whole month. Or
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Another one is shoulding. I should have done this. I should do that. I shouldn't have done that. Another one is I used to be. I used to be able to do this. I used to be able to run a 8-minute mile. I used to be able to do all these things. Another one is not good enough. It's not enough or it's not good enough. I'm not good enough. And kind of similar to that is comparison thinking, comparing myself to others. And this is where the leaderboard toxicity takes a hold of most people, especially if it doesn't get to be fun anymore for them. It's
yeah.
causing bad feelings, right? So all of these, imposter syndrome's another one. All of these are the things that turn on the habenula. And the more of these that you have, it usually means the more traumatic or difficult childhood you had, because your habenula is more trigger happy. And so you have more ways to fail, more ways to turn on your habenula. Your habenula is going to be triggered more often than another person who didn't have that same burden of those traumas. And you're going to be more likely to lose your motivation because your habenula is going to turn on too often.
Yeah. Now you got into the solution, which again is, like I said, is
Oh,
part of
sorry.
what I loved about this.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
no, no. What I mean is, in the book, you got into the solutions, and the reality is, I love to learn about this stuff, but what I love more is when we have practical things that we can do. But right before we step into the practical, I want to talk about one concept you got into that I think is really important for us to understand, because too many times I think, particularly as we get older, it's you can't teach the old dog new tricks kind of concept. Is that we're wired the way we're wired, and we are who we are, and we really can't fix us, which is closed-minded thinking and not the right way to approach this. You called it cognitive flexibility.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's a trait you see in some people, but we all have capacity for it, right?
That's right. And in fact, there's a recent study that came out last week that shows that cognitive flexibility is very highly associated with intelligence, whereas it used to be that intelligence was thought to be, your memory or your focus. And now the new model for intelligence is the flexibility of your mind's ability to shift, and adapt, and almost like yoga for the mind, stretch and change and things like that. And that lends itself to iteration. And so if I have a fixed idea about myself, and this is the idea of like growth mindset, right? Like growth mindset is I'm an evolving being, I'm not fixed, God isn't done with me yet, kind of thing. And then that means I might be able to learn. I might be able to adopt a skill, lo and behold. And so those things are emerging as the more important focus that we should have on what to do with our brains than to be, holders of knowledge. And in this world of AI, humans' ability to hold knowledge is completely obsolete. But what is valuable about, our brains and our intersection with this new world of AI is our ability to adapt, our ability to, create and iterate in these times, because AI itself was born out of iteration. That's literally the primordial soup that those scientists created for it. And if a bot didn't iterate enough, they killed that bot, and then only the ones that were highly, highly iterative survived that process. And that's how we got AI. So we are that. And it's not my word for it. Cognitive flexibility is the word that the field calls it, but
Yeah.
it is this ability to change your mind, to see different perspectives really quickly, to not get stuck on a thought, and to get present here, to not get in your head and get stuck there, but to get, to move with what's happening in front of you.
Okay. Now the practical nuts and bolts of change. So if we're going to address our brain and our motivation and kill switch, and we're going to fix this problem, You gave us a process, and you gave me, anyway, in the book, there's a acronym, and I don't know what it is about me, but I am like drawn to acronyms like a moth to flame.
That's
Uh,
great. Probably because you're so well read.
and so the book is, I mean, the word is iterates.
Yeah.
And of course, that's a whole lot of letters, but it's an acronym that tells us the various ways that we can kind of reframe a problem or reframe what we're going through
Right.
to give us that different lens that we need to successfully get past whatever this is that's holding us back. Can you take us through that acronym and how we can use it to address our
Yeah.
motivation problems?
Yeah, and in design thinking world, this would be like an ideation tool, meaning that I'm out of ideas. You know, like those women you talked about at the beginning, like nothing ever works for me. So for somebody who's stuck, who is out of ideas, who has tried the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, and they're just in this dead end state, this is a way to dig yourself out of that stuck state and start iterating, because the number one thing that you can do to get away from the habenula action and the motivation loss is to iterate your way out of it. So the first letter is, each of these are categories, these 8 categories, and they're kind of like mutually exclusive. So they're separate from each other, but they're collectively exhaustive. I haven't found a type of iteration that didn't fit into one or more of these categories. So the first one, I, is inspiration. That's things like, well, it didn't take me overnight to get to this weight. It's not going to take me overnight to get out, so it gives you some patience, it allows you to encourage yourself, maybe an inspirational video, some influencer that you find really inspiring and that kind of thing. The second one is T, like time. They talk a lot about habit stacking, like, putting this habit with something like brushing your teeth and drinking more water, or taking your supplements and eating breakfast. Like those kinds of things are time of. So when I, then I, is how one of our coaches has said it in the past. When I have breakfast, then I take my medicine. Those kinds of manipulations of time, you could increase the net amount of time, you can decrease the amount of time, you can increase the number of reps, you can increase the intensity of the time that you do it, all in 1 minute, like HIIT training, those kinds of things. So that's time. The next one's E. So that's your environment. So that's, take the carbs off the counter, throw away the cake after you're done with it. Like don't sit there and have a willpower struggle with something in your sensory field. You will lose eventually when you're tired or it's almost bedtime. R is reduce. So people who want to shrink things, they want to shrink the number of push-ups they have to do. They want to shrink the number of teeth they have to floss. They want to shrink the amount of weight that they're training with, like that kind of thing, to make it more doable, to make it more enjoyable. They want to reduce the friction between them and the gym, so they put their workout bag out by the door, like that kind of thing. Adding is the opposite of that. So adding friction, how can I make it harder to do the wrong thing? How can I put the sweets in the freezer so I got to wait for them to thaw out before I can eat them? Like those kinds of tactics to really slow myself down to the thing that I otherwise want to do too much. Or it's also adding spice, adding variety to things that are boring, things that I maybe don't want to do, and adding some sort of fun to it. I talked to somebody the other day who is in this Spanish class, hates it, can't get herself to study for it because it's performative. And then we found out a way like that she wants to iterate is to learn a song in Spanish, and that brings life and fun to Spanish. So adding a song, to her curriculum. The next T is togetherness. So in my research, nobody changes alone. Adding the right people, maybe sunsetting some of the wrong people or reducing them a little bit because they can be saboteurs. And then expectations is the second E. So expectations, what I find is that these are like little time bombs. Somebody starts out, they usually do a SMART goal, then they go a while, and then at some magical time in the future, all of a sudden, their brain is like, well, you should be further along by now, shouldn't you? Like that kind of expectation. They didn't know they had it until they hadn't reached it, until the weight they were expecting to see on the scale was lower but they didn't reach it. And they're like, oh, or they reach it and they don't like how they look. They thought they would look a certain way, So those kinds of expectations need to be iterated on, letting them go, changing it, that kind of thing, so that you don't feel bad, so that you don't fail. And then the last letter is swaps. So a lot of people see these, cauliflower rice for white rice, whole grain bread for white grain, like different things that you can swap out, small plates for large plates, different things that you can do to preserve your ability to have things and to have certain sweet, salty, fatty experiences with healthier versions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. All right. I define wellness as being the healthiest, fittest, and happiest you can be. What are three strategies or tactics to get and stay well?
Yeah, so I think that what my research has shown is that there's three things that people who lifelong get and maintain their wellness do differently. Number one, instead of setting a hard goal, they set a mindset of a practice. I'm going to practice this. I'm going to see how this goes. Number two, they neutralize failure from the past or neutralize failure thoughts as they go. So they have an intuitive sense of when they're failing, kind of like you saw that leaderboard at CrossFit and you saw failure disease in your future. You didn't know that that's what you were seeing, but you immediately steered away from it because you're like, that's going to make me feel bad. So that's the kind of thought that I'm talking about. Then the third one is that they iterate. They tinker with it, they tweak it, both to get out of stuck spots as well as to make it more interesting and to level up over time. And there's not a single successful story or person I've ever seen who has not done those three things as a way of achieving that success.
Thank you. If someone wanted to learn more about you, learn more about your book, Unstoppable Brain, where would you like for me to send them?
It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's all the normal book places. And then I have a website, drkyrabobinet.com. And then I have a software company that helps with habit formation according to this brain science called FreshTry.com.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed today's show, take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you would, please leave a rating and review on your podcast player of choice. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Jeff Bailey and discuss his book, Mobility for Life: Healthy Joints, Strong Bones, and a Peaceful Mind with Avita Yoga. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.